Dear colleagues interested in Uralic languages, welcome back. This is the video presenting the second lecture of the course Language Attrition. And in this lecture, I present and discuss several examples of structural change in language-led circumstances, and I organize these examples according to the level of linguistic structure, starting with vocabulary, then phonology, morphology, and finally morphosyntax or syntax. But I focus on the last two because I'm more interested in grammatical change in language-led circumstances than in phonological change in the lexicon. And all these examples are not meant just to illustrate that the language of the last speakers of dying variety is constantly changing, which is kind of trivial, but more so to demonstrate that what the main principle or the main principles of production of speech by these last speakers, which are usually semi-speakers or weaker speakers of the language compared to the speakers of the earlier generations, and also the main mechanisms of structural change, of phonological or morphological or morphosyntactic change in language-led circumstances. And the main principle of storage and production of speech is that the last speakers produce speech by rote and not by rule. What does that mean? So you probably have heard these terms, but what does that mean? That means that whereas full speakers of healthy varieties build words, phrases, clauses, or sentences by applying grammatical rules, the semi-speakers or weaker speakers of dying varieties, they store and also produce speech by chunks of memorized rote phrases. So the linguistic repertoire in the last speaker generation is kept intact by repetition, more so than by application of grammatical rules. Normally, the grammatical rules are partly, at least, deactivated in these last speaker versions of the dying language. The main mechanism of language change, of structural change in language-led circumstances, is analogy. And those of you who have studied comparative historical Uralic linguistics know that analogy is a very common explanation of historical change. But especially in this case, in the last speakers' varieties, analogy is everywhere in the structure. So an example of analogical change is where, for example, the third person singular form of the verb is extended to other persons, or the first person plural indicative form of the verb is extended to some kind of hortatives or adhortatives, or you may call them also first person plural imperatives. And this kind of analogical generalization can be observed in the recordings of the last speaker varieties of dying languages. In this lecture, I also discuss two issues which might seem surprising for you. And the first one is, it's a paradox. In the last lecture, I said that the main manifestation of structural language death is something that I call reduction without compensation. So the language is reduced. We have less rules and less forms. But in this lecture, I kind of contradict myself by observing that the language of the last speaker's generation is actually somewhat richer than in the previous generation. What we observe in these recordings of the last speakers is that we have a lot of unmotivated or free variation of form. That means that we have alternative forms which are used to express the same function. And what are the reasons? I speculate about these reasons, but this unmotivated variance is observed not only across speaker varieties, across idiolects, but also within a single idiolect, within the language of a single speaker. And please study my slides. There I speculate about the reasons for these impressions of the language becoming richer just before it dies out. The second issue in my lecture that might surprise you is related to language revitalization. And I focus on the question of whether there is such thing as successful revitalization of moribund language. Because there has been some discussion among specialists, and there are voices which say that this revitalized variety, this revitalized language, is not a direct successor of the extinct or indigenous variety of the indigenous language, but just a Creole which is based on this indigenous variety as its lexifier. So in Creole studies, people speak about lexifier language, and the lexifier language is the language which provides the vocabulary, the lexicon for the future Creole. So I won't go deeper now into these issues or to other issues, and I invite you to study my slides. And if it's not enough, if you want more, please study my publications or my books, which I presented in the last video. And I say goodbye now at this point. And please, of course, study the slides and the videos of my colleagues in this course. Thank you for your attention.